Awkward.
Here, you start with it.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
How the hell are you?
Thanks for coming out to our talk today. I was supposed to have presenter view available, but I don't, so I'll just be winging my stuff. So it might be a little rough, but you'll all still learn all the important things, so we'll figure it out. So yeah, thanks for coming to our talk, Tips and Tricks to Improve Your AR Game Designs. I'm Dustin Kochensparger, and this is Blake Gross, and we are the co-founders of DB Creations, an MR game studio based in Bellevue, Washington. We've been working on a whole bunch of really awesome games over the past year. You can see some of the titles here. And we really like building things that push kind of the cutting edge of what MR can do today for the gaming space. And so we'll start off with just a quick preview of some of the things that we've been building lately. If that plays. We have audio by chance? Yeah, thank you.
What great music.
Are you commenting already? Wow. Amazing. Who made these?
I like that we can feel the bass.
It's just for you. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we've really been making some really awesome stuff, and we're excited to get to share all of that with you guys today. So I think first up is going to be Blake talking about adaptive space setup.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've learned through building AR games is that one of the most key things is the amount of time it takes to get a user into the experience. However, that has to be balanced with the constant need that every AR and MR title has of trying to get the most information possible to be able to create advanced levels for the player. We have two games here. On the left is our game Table Trenches Operation Living Room, which we released in 2022. Here we have the user do a full scan where we voxelize their space to try to figure out good play areas for them to play. The only issue, though, is that this takes about 30 seconds, even on a LiDAR iPhone, to set up. And on the Snap platform, 30 seconds is like death. On the right, we have Table Towers, and this is our city builder. We took our learnings from Operation Living Room, where we saw player fall off because of that setup time, and we made it so that the moment that they can find a play space to start playing in, we allow them to start playing immediately, and that made the user retention much higher. Something else that's a great advantage of trying to enable the player to choose where they're playing and where they're setting things up is that the player is much smarter than us as the developer and figuring out where's the optimal place to put content in the room. Currently, we're still very limited in the amount of semantic understanding we have of a user's environment. And an actual player will have a better understanding what that looks like. So here, we have a completed city in Table Towers. And this user-generated city is something that's much more advanced than we could have generated automatically. And the last title I want to talk about here is the latest game we released on the Snap platform, which is Jasper's Archery Challenge. In Jasper's Archery Challenge, we took a mix of both of the learnings from Operation Living Room of doing this type of space setup flow, as well as Table Towers about getting users into the experience quickly. Here, we start users off by having them do the minimum amount of setup that is needed to play the game. They need to find a floor portal and a wall portal for us to be able to spawn monsters from. However, as they're playing the game, we continue to scan in the background to see if there's any other available spaces that portals can be created in. That way, as they're playing the game, we can enrich that experience by bringing it more into their spaces they're playing, but they don't have to do all of that up front. We think of this formally in kind of three different steps. The first is thinking through what is the minimal viable data that's needed in order to start a player's play experience. The next is figuring out what is the actual amount of background processing we can do without hitting any type of performance limits for the real-time experience that we're already doing while they're playing the game. And the third, and probably the most important one, is figuring out when is a good state to update the game content. You don't actually want to always be dynamically updating the space because that is going to get in the way of the player actually playing the game. You want to do it at breakpoints where it makes sense so that the player doesn't feel overwhelmed or content isn't shifting at random. In Jasper's Archery Challenge, we do this in between game rounds. So you can see the portals spawn in at the beginning of a game round rather than spawning in live as we're actually discovering them. Now, related to this, Dustin is going to talk about some of the ways we experimented with simple interaction design to create one of our hit games.
Thanks, Blake. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about simple interaction design, which I think is one of the most important parts to consider when delving into building AR, MR games. This is the way that people are going to actually interact with what you're doing, and it's often very novel. There's a ton of different ways you can do these sorts of interactions, from hand gestures to Bluetooth controllers and touchscreens and anything in between. And there's no kind of uniform system by which any of these platforms do this sort of thing. So it's one of the biggest considerations we make early on when we're thinking about building one of these experiences. And so today we're going to talk about probably our most well-known game, Sushi Snag, which is a face-based tongue controller sushi eating game for Snapchat that we developed last year. And it's been one of our favorites to build, and I think we learned a lot by pushing ourselves to do something a bit different and build something like this. So first of all, I'll show you what the completed product looks like.
That's me.
Oh, is it? Pretty good score. If you scan that snap code, you can play yourself. They'll keep your audio off if you're going to. So what was the first thing we were thinking about when we built this? So we'd actually never done a face filter style game before. This was the first one we'd ever built. Usually we were doing more world-facing stuff like you saw with Blake's slides. But we wanted to push ourselves to target the platform's strengths in this case because we knew that face filter style lenses are the most popular lenses on Snapchat. And so we said, well, we should probably target what the platform is doing best to do an experiment. That also meant that a lot of the tools that we were using in the Snap Lens Studio platform were specifically designed to help us make that kind of content, which sped up development time a lot. And so by targeting the platform's strengths, we were able to more quickly develop our game and get it in front of players. Another thing that we thought about a lot when we were building this game was bringing inspiration from new places. That's one of my favorite things about AR and MR is that there's so much blue ocean out there. We can really look to new and different ways and places that we want to try and build things from. And so in this case, we looked to one of our favorite games from growing up, which maybe some of you played, although the N64 is kind of old now, so I don't know. This is from Pokemon Stadium, and it's, what's the game called? I can't remember the name of it.
I don't know.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's one of the mini games in Pokemon Stadium. That's not even the main point in the game, but you control, every player controls a lick-a-tongue, and they stick out their tongues and eat this sushi. And somebody, I think it was Blake, brought it up in one of our planning meetings and said, oh, that was a fun thing, and we kind of logged it away in the back of our minds. And then when we were thinking about our face eating, or our face filter game, we're like, oh, could we track the tongue? Could we do that? And that really started our discussion about actually seriously building something like this. So looking back to our childhood memories gave us a good inspiration to get started. And so this is probably the most important thing I wanted to talk about when related to this project was the power of prototyping and how important that is. So on the left, you can see just a piece of concept art that was done to kind of show what could this game look like starting off. And we always have our artists make a piece of concept art we call the hero piece to kind of set the tone for what the game's going to be. And that's the piece on the left there. But as soon as we finish that and we're kind of all aligned on that North Star of, okay, what's this game going to be like? What do we kind of want the end product to be? We immediately go into what I consider to be the most important phase of building an AR/MR game, gray box prototyping. And so in the middle and on the right there, you can see what our early gray box prototype looks like. It's about as simple as we could make it, really just trying to have tongue controller, sushi rolls move by, basic score. That's all we needed, because we really needed to get in to be able to test that mechanic and understand, how is this going to play? How is this going to feel? Is this going to be functional? And I think everybody who's ever made a game knows that you kind of have to do this step as early as possible to validate that fun and how that gameplay is going to be. But I think it's even more important for AR and MR, because everything we're trying is novel and new, ideally anyway. And so you need to start testing these things out and find out, like, hey, can we track the tongue accurately enough to make that feel like this is, going to be something people would want to do, or is it going to be too latent and it's not going to work, right? We should scrap the idea early. So this is kind of a big key for us in being successful in building AR and MR games. And at the end of the day, things worked out really well. We launched the game last year in the summer, and we were really surprised. We got over 10 million views in the first week of launch, and then we're now sitting at over 650 million plays, which is the best of any of our lenses by far, and pretty good for a lens that actually, players can play for up to a minute per session. We're seeing a lot of retention. So very, very happy, and it was great to see how we could kind of use our rapid prototyping skills as well as our targeting of the platform's strengths to build something in only a few months that for us was a pretty major success. So now Blake's going to talk a little bit more about some mixed reality constraints and designing around those.
So this is fun because we're going to show a little bit of a game that's not out yet that we're currently working on for the Quest 3. So something that is interesting about developing in mixed reality is that a player's understanding, or what a player thinks or a user thinks that the system is capable of, is basically what they think they're capable of. But what the system's actually capable of is much more limited. And it's important for the user to be able to understand both what the system is and isn't capable of and what is in their control in terms of stuff like scan flow, as well as where the system is falling short so that they don't get frustrated while playing games. And we're going to look at this through accuracy, feedback around when meshing isn't necessarily meeting their expectations, and occlusion characteristics. This is very loud. No, I don't want audio for that one, but oh well. All right, so on the left here, you can see a scan that I made of a little piece of my office, and I put a little pillow on the floor and my dog's toy. And you can see that the pillow is covered by the mesh where the toy isn't, but a user might think that both would be. This is something we found that is especially true because we tend to build games where everything's really small. So people think that the accuracy of the meshing is going to match the accuracy of the units. And so I'll play this video real quick. It's loud, so I won't talk during it. Oh, or it's not going to play. I don't know. Oops, I'm pressing the laser.
You're blinding the audience. Good work.
Sorry. It's the music. Anyways, all that's to show is that the unit is able to go up to the pillow, but the other one does not go through the toy. The nice thing about the Quest platform and their setup flow is that when a user is setting up their experience, they're able to see what is and isn't included in the meshing. So they'll have a good sense of when they're scanning what will actually be part of their mesh and what will be captured in their world. Something that we do in order to try to help the user understand these limitations is we do something I call mesh reveal, which is when we have a game where there's dynamic assets, we make it so that whenever they get close to a mesh, we show part of that mesh to the user so that they know that's what's happening and that's why a collision is happening. The reason for this is mainly to provide clarity and avoid frustration. With a lot of different tracking techniques, there's kind of these different problems that can happen. Sometimes you get what I call false positives, which is dynamic objects like people can move after you make your scan, but then you're still colliding into them. And so you need to make it clear that that's what they're hitting because it doesn't line up with any real-world geometry anymore. Here on the right, I show the way that the system is understanding the world in this game that we're showing, which is Table Choppers, which is that there's a bunch of tracked planes, but the way tracked planes work is that they don't necessarily create an enclosed volume. So it's very easy for your dynamic objects to get behind these tracked planes, and they don't necessarily cover all of the space. So this makes it really clear where the actual areas that they're colliding with and hitting are. And then there's also cases where there's just incomplete scanning, and this can help the user realize that they have to go back to their scan flow and do more work in order to have a more complete mesh. The final part of this I want to talk about has to do with occlusion. This is interesting because there's a big trade-off here between being accurate in how things are looking, versus the system and players' understanding of how the game should act. So here on the left, I have it's a real-time depth map from the Oculus Quest where it's doing the actual real-time depth tracking. And you can see as I move the chair, it updates its depth maps accurately. However, when we're actually playing the game, what we're using is the fixed scene map that the player is creating on their own. Now, the kind of naive thought is, okay, well, I always want the occlusion to be correct, so I'm just going to turn that on, and then we'll all be happy. But the problem is that can add a lot of gameplay confusion, because if you're occluding, so it's because the collision mask we're using in order for objects to navigate or for users to be able to place like buildings or structures is going to be that mesh, that scene mask. And so if you start occluding that information with real-time data, then that can occlude the stuff that they're trying to interact with in the game. So while it may seem more optimal to actually be doing real-time occlusion over that, it's probably going to get in the way of their gameplay and can cause other errors, especially if there's types of shifting with that mesh. So what we recommend for these type of experiences is to use the scene mesh so that everything is aligned together, and that, like I said earlier, if there's opportunities to update that in between game sessions, then that's when that should happen rather than it all happening in real time. And then ideally what we would like is that only dynamic objects are being captured by any type of this dynamic mesh occlusion. And I should note that this isn't a characteristic that's unique to Quest 3. Other platforms also do real-time depth different from their world meshing, and this is something that needs to be considered with that as well. And now I'll hand it back to Dustin to talk on a different note about working with branded experiences with one of our partners.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, I'm going to spend a little bit of time switching gears pretty heavily from some of our tech side stuff to talk a little bit about some of the working with a brand side of things, which is something that we find to be a pretty big part of the AR and MR space today, working with branded content in some way. And we've done a little bit of that as well, working with Lionsgate on a lens for the John Wick 4 movie. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Go. Perfect. So yeah, there's this we're going to talk about. So as with the last one, I will quickly show you a video of what that looks like in action first. All right. So this was a quick lens that we built to support the movie launch, and the specific goal was to build a connected lens experience, a multiplayer AR card game for 2 players using connected lenses to battle each other with these cards. You were playing against an AI opponent there, but we had a lot of fun getting to build this. But it was also our first experience working with a brand, especially one of this caliber, Lionsgate. And so this was an interesting experience for us. And so the first thing that we sort of delved into, and I think was really valuable, was spending a bunch of time immersing ourselves understanding the brand before we did anything else. Basically, right after we got the ping that said, hey, would you like to work on something? We started learning more about what makes Lionsgate tick, what's all about, let's learn more about the John Wick brand, let's learn more about the company and their values. And this was a bunch of time on me mostly to kind of do this research, but it was really valuable because we're able to learn how does this company think and what's most important to their brand. You know, with these large brands that have spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time cultivating a certain way of being in the marketplace, for us, this was really key to understand those things so that when we're talking to them, we're all using the same language, we're working in the same universe, we're not bringing ideas that aren't going to mesh well. And that speeds up the whole process because we're already on the same page from the beginning. So that was a lot of research time spent, but it was very valuable to make sure that we were all talking in the same way. Let's see next. Yes. So next up was actually building the pitch for them, and this was really interesting. Actually, we spent a fair bunch of time once again using their actual like brand language, the color schemes, the style of text even, and the way that they write phrasing and use that in the brand to build out the pitch deck when we were sending them versions of, hey, here's what we think we could do for you. And this was a bunch more work than a standard deck, which might take a couple of days to bang out. This was like, I think, a week and a half of my time to really like tweak everything, customize, get the graphics in, pull reference, that sort of thing. But it was time super well spent because the decks went over extremely well. They loved that we were talking the way they think, the way that they want to be immersed in their brand and how it's presented to users. And that made the pitch process so much smoother because we got talking to the kind of complicated part right away, which is, so what's the game? How are the mechanics? All this sort of what we think is the really important and critical part to get right. But for the brand, like starting from that place of all being on the same page, talking the same language was really key to getting to that quickly. So once again, a lot of time spent up front, but it saved us a lot of headache of going back and forth because we got right into the meat of what is this game? How does it work? And actually doing the stuff that we think we're pretty good at. And lastly, we found over the process of building this lens that we needed to communicate in a slightly different way and a lot more often. Coming from the agency side of the world, I think a lot of folks are less used to working with interactive content. We're building games, and so that's kind of what we do. But they're used to seeing more app style of information, and so like lots of mock-ups showing very specific layouts of every individual screen across the game experience, which is very different. When we're doing a game pitch, we usually are talking about mechanics and showing video of here's how this gray box prototype's going to work and that sort of thing. But we were asked a lot to build out very specific, as you can see here, like wireframes and then like full mocks of every screen of what the lens is going to do, which is very different than a lot of our game development process. And so the big takeaway we had here was we needed to have a fair bit of time on our 2D asset creation folks and our UI team to build out all these mocks and comps and do feedback on those regularly, as opposed to sending like gameplay videos and doing more like gameplay reviews. We're looking at these screens week over week, and so make sure you have enough time in your schedule and on your team to build those assets, because that was something we didn't necessarily plan for at the beginning that we found ourselves doing a lot of. But yeah, at the end of the day, this was a really awesome experience to get to work with a brand. And I think in success, everybody wins with these. The brand gets something that's very custom to what they want. It helps sell the message that they want to share and overall build the kind of game that or the kind of content they want to see. Players love it because they get to engage more deeply with the brand and in a way that feels authentic and the way that they want it to be. And as developers, we get to have an application that probably gets a lot more eyes on it than it might normally because we're using that brand success to drive us to even further heights. And so it was a really awesome experience to get to work with, and we had a lot of fun building something very custom like this with a brand once we learned how that was going to work. And now, Blake, you can wrap us up.
Yeah, so in conclusion, today I start off by going over trying to figure out the correct trade-off between how much information do we need to get from the user in order to create an interesting AR experience, as well as considering time to play, especially in a mobile setting where time is something that the user doesn't necessarily have a lot of. Then Dustin went into interaction design paradigms and how the simple mechanic of opening your mouth made us have a hit with our game Sushi Snag. I talked a little bit about, in mixed reality, that the user is going to expect everything to work perfectly, but that they have to understand the trade-offs that exist and not get frustrated while playing the game, as well as know when they need to go back and adjust their scan to create a better play experience. And then finally, Dustin concluded by talking through what it was like working with a branded partner, or on a branded project with a partner, and some tips about how to best pitch them on that, especially when working on a game experience. So with that, that's all we have today, but we're happy to answer any questions, and feel free to reach out to us about anything. So thank you.